here helping out hosting today, and I'm going to introduce our amazing speaker. So first off, welcome to the 2026 UCR Riverside Staff. I just totally messed that up. UC Riverside Staff Conference hosted by UCR Staff Assembly, Employee and Organizational Development, and the Leaders of Excellence and Distinction. We're so thrilled to have you all join us today. A few helpful notes in case you have never attended an event on Zoom events before. Each session is being recorded and will be available in the Zoom events website. Registered conference participants will have access to the recorded sessions for 90 days. If you would like closed captions for this session, please click on the Show Closed Caption button at the bottom of the screen. While we can use chat to interact, actually for this session, let's go ahead and primarily use chat. So put your questions in the chat. If you have comments, feel free to put those in the chat as well. Let's give it, actually, I think we're good. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our amazing speaker. And just a quick reminder first, please make sure that you are mindful of UCR's principles of community, and we'll pop that in the chat. Thank you, Dominica. She's already got it. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our amazing speaker, Joanna Van Brocklin from our Employee and Organizational Development team. Joanna's passion is developing staff at all levels to maximize personal effectiveness. With more than 10 years combined HR experience, she has focused much of that time in talent management and development, creating effective learning experiences for staff in the areas of communication, customer service, employee engagement, personal effectiveness, and manager leadership development. Joanna holds a master's in organizational learning and effectiveness and a bachelor's in human resource management. In addition, she holds several certifications, including SHRM Certified Professional, Gallup Certified Strengths Coach, Everything DISC Certified Practitioner, and a certified online training professional. And Joanna is just genuinely an amazing person. So with all of that, welcome, Joanna. Thank you.
Erica, thank you so much for that. And I am just so thrilled to have you here supporting me and Dominica as well. And welcome to everyone in attendance today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join the UC Riverside Staff Conference. I also want to acknowledge that we have presence here, not only from UCR, but from so many of our other sister campuses, which is just very exciting to see. So with that, because this is also meant to be a networking event, I do want to encourage you to network during our time together during this session. So if you're open and willing to sharing your LinkedIn profiles with each other, feel free and do that in the chat. But we are also going to engage throughout our time together today via the chat. So with that, once again, welcome to everyone who's just joining. My name is Joanna Van Brocklin. I am one of the trainers here with UC Riverside HR's Employee and Organizational Development team. And this session is all about how can we stop stalling and start doing. This is a personality-driven guide to really helping us get it done. And in order to do that, here's what we're going to cover. We are going to understand what the research tells us about procrastination, what it is, why we do it. I'm going to also introduce the 4 DISC styles, which will give you an overview of each style to help give you an opportunity in identifying what your preferred style is. So even if you've never taken the DISC assessment in the past, that's okay. You don't need to know that or have taken it for this session. I'm going to give you all the information you need to kind of at least identify where you think you might fall in the DISC model. And then finally, we will explore some style-specific hacks that will then give you opportunity to commit to begin applying at least one hack starting today, which is going to help move you forward in your progress. So I want to start by exploring what we think we know about procrastinators. And I have developed a few poll everywhere polls. So to join these polls, they are anonymous. If you have a dual monitor, feel free and type in this web link that you see here. You can also, with a mobile device or mobile phone, scan this QR code and it's going to pop up each question as I reveal it on my slide. So go ahead and do that. Access the poll, and once you have access, feel free and respond. Procrastination is just poor time management. What would you say? Is that true or false? And if for some reason the poll everywhere is not working for you, go ahead and type it in the chat. And the link, I see you here in chat, Nicole. The link is up here on the screen, pollev.com/. You'll have to type it in, unfortunately, but yes. Oh, thank you, Erica. All right, we'll give it another maybe 5 seconds here, see what responses we have. Very good. And it looks like we have probably about half of the responses coming through, so I'll give it a little bit more time. Great thing is once you've accessed poll everywhere, the next few questions are going to pop up for you automatically. So looks like the majority of folks so far are suggesting the answer is false. Well, with that, keep your answers coming through. It's actually an emotion, so you're correct. The answer is false. Procrastination is an emotion regulation problem. We don't avoid a task because we forget how to use a calendar, for example. We avoid it because the task surfaces some negative feelings, such as boredom or anxiousness or incompetence, or maybe even that feeling of being just extremely overwhelmed. We're avoiding the negative emotion, not a time block. So let's try the next question here. Waiting until the last minute produces better work. What would you say, true or false? Great, lots of responses coming through. Again, I'm seeing the majority are suggesting false, a few trues. Okay. Give it about 5 more seconds here. See if we can get some more of you to respond. Good. Okay. Yes, again, the answer is false. You aren't doing better work necessarily if you're waiting until the last minute. I'll admit I was one of those people, especially in primary school and high school. I would wait till the last minute to study for a test, for example. This isn't necessarily better work that's happening. You're just using adrenaline to overcome boredom of the task or whatever that might be. So adrenaline is actually a stressful fuel source. Good. Yes, false. Next question here. Procrastinators are just lazy or unmotivated. What would you say, true or false? Good question, Carol. And I think we're going to answer your question here as we get a little bit deeper into our content. So keep that in mind. All right. Procrastinators are just lazy or unmotivated. What would you say, true or false? All right. Dora's saying a little bit of both. Okay. Lots of response here. So good. Again, the answer with this one is false. Kitty saying it depends on the mood. Could be. Laziness is a lack of desire to exert effort. Procrastination is actually an active process. You choose to do something else instead of the task that you know you should be doing. So it's rooted in anxiety and stress, not necessarily apathy. So good. Okay, I think I have one more poll everywhere for you. So let's try this one. Perfectionists are some of the biggest procrastinators. What would you say? True or false? Okay. Lots of, okay. And isn't this fun? Y'all kind of caught on. Okay, Kitty, good. Go big or go home. Yeah. So I'm seeing a lot of the majority of responses here suggesting true, some of you suggesting false. The answer to this one is true. When your standard is perfection all the time, anything that you're trying to get started, to get off the ground, can seem absolutely terrifying. If you can't guarantee that you're going to do it perfectly, it feels safer to then delay rather than starting it all. All right. Well done. Thank you all for engaging in these. Yeah, Nicole, me too. Guilty for sure with this one. But thank you for engaging in this. We have a lot more to cover, and we are going to continue engaging together as much as possible. I do have a handout that I want to share. I believe you can access it through the resources tab on your Zoom panel. But my colleagues are also going to share in the chat a PDF version just in case you're not able to find the resources tab from the Zoom bar. Thank you so much, Erica, for adding that in. So as we go through the presentation, I will make or have references on my slides to the page number so that you can take notes or, just know that we are also following along using that handout. Now, here's the big idea that I want to start with. Because the workplace and our society in general places high value on productivity, it can be extremely difficult to believe what I'm about to say. But try and hear me when I say this. Procrastination is not a personal feeling. I'll say it again. Procrastination is not a personal feeling. It is an emotional response. And our personality style plays a role in how and why we are actually procrastinating. And to overcome this requires understanding what our tendencies are, what our motivators and demotivators are. So kind of going back to Carol's question in the chat, what other reasons is there for procrastinating besides, what we mentioned earlier? We're going to have an opportunity today to really explore what it means for you based on your personality style, your preferred style. So the question is, okay, well, if procrastination is not a personal failing, what exactly is it then? So in the chat, this is where I want to invite you to share. How would you define procrastination? Go ahead and type your response in chat. You don't have to type a huge response, maybe a word or a short phrase, whatever comes to mind. What do you think of? Good. Avoidance. Some agreement there. Putting things off, unsure of a task, putting it off, stalling, not wanting to face it. Priority listing, delay, good. Fear of starting and not finishing. Great. Fatigue, overwhelm, wonderful. Task paralysis, wonderful. Okay, these are great. Exhaustion, yes. Okay, so let me share with you, and you're going to find this definition on page 2 in your guide. Procrastination defined is an irrational tendency to delay required tasks or assignments, despite those negative effects that we know exist when we procrastinate, due to this postponement on the individual or the organization. So when we procrastinate, there are truly some negative consequences of when we're doing this. Simply stated, procrastination is the act of putting off tasks. And many of you actually stated that in the chat here. So some more information I want to share with you. People often procrastinate in order to avoid those negative emotions associated with the task or the assignment that you're being asked to do. And as we talk through this, I want you to really think about your space in the workplace, okay? So again, these can be things such as feeling bored or maybe self-doubt about your own competencies or your knowledge of that specific task or assignment. So there was an article that I came across in December of last year, and that's really what inspired me to develop this presentation for our staff conference. And it was posted on the DISC profile blog. The author noted some really interesting data, which I want to share with you here. So scientific studies estimate that approximately 15 to 20% of adults are chronic procrastinators. And more than that, 95% of procrastinators actually wish they didn't procrastinate so much. If that's you, go ahead and admit that in the chat. I will say, as someone who can admit that I procrastinate from time to time, by the way, even on developing this presentation in particular, I wish I didn't do it so much. Yeah, absolutely. Now that begs the question, if most of us who procrastinate wish we didn't do it at all, why do we do it? Why? It's just crazy. We always do it, but then we wish we didn't do it. So what is our motivation? Well, as we mentioned before, personality plays a large role in how and why we procrastinate. Now, I want to mention this does not disregard other factors that affect procrastination. And these other factors can certainly include stress, mental and physical health, one's environment in your workplace. All of these things are very real, and they can also contribute to procrastination. And I recognize because of that, this can actually be a very complex topic. For our purposes today, though, we're going to focus on how understanding your personality type and your behavioral tendencies can be used to help you regulate your procrastination habits. Yeah, seeing a lot of what it is coming through the chat here. Some people mentioning laziness, a procrastinator. I love that. Way to own it, Christina. Yeah, indecision, fear. I 100% have this fear of failure, so I can relate to so much of what is being shared here in the chat. So moving into the 4 DISC styles, I'm just curious, share in the chat if you have completed the DISC assessment before. And just to reiterate, you do not have to have completed the DISC assessment for this session. I'm going to give you everything you need. So I'm seeing a little bit of both. Some of you, yes, some of you, no. So good. If you've completed it, feel free and use what you already know about yourself based on that assessment as we go through our time today. If not, this is a great place for you to start, and maybe you're going to generate more interest in actually wanting to complete the DISC assessment. But let me tell you a little bit about it. The DISC model is a behavioral assessment tool designed to help people understand their own communication styles. But not only that, it's meant to also help you understand and be open to understanding the styles of your colleagues' communication styles as well. There are many benefits to knowing your DISC style, including enhanced empathy and behavioral flexibility. For today, I want to focus on the one benefit of enhanced self-awareness, because with this model, you can really begin to understand what your style preferences and tendencies are. And we're going to refer to those style preferences or tendencies as our motivators. And this is really going to hopefully help reveal to you why you procrastinate based on your preferred style. So once you're equipped with that self-awareness through your DISC model, this is going to help you apply the information so that you can start today with addressing those reasons for procrastination. Let me give you a crash course now with the 4 DISC styles. So you can follow along on page 3 in your participant guide. But here on this model, this is the DISC model. D stands for dominance, I, influence, S is steadiness, and C is conscientiousness. Now, if you imagine this model, I'm going to split it up kind of like a pie. So we have this horizontal line, which goes from left to right. On the left, this line represents those who are more results focused. And on the right, this horizontal line focuses on those who are people focused. So on page 3 in your guide, you have space at the top there to note where you might fall on this continuum. Would you consider yourself more of a results-focused person or a people-focused individual? So go ahead and take a quick note of where you fall on this horizontal continuum. Next, we have this vertical line, which runs top to bottom. So at the top, this would represent individuals who are fast-paced and outspoken, and the line vertically to the bottom represents those who are cautious and maybe more reflective. So again, where do you fall in this vertical continuum? Would you consider yourself more fast-paced and outspoken, or more cautious and reflective? Go ahead and take note on page 3 there. So armed with this very high level information of where you might fall in the DISC model, let me share a little more about each of these tendencies. So the D tendencies, the dominance tendencies, you tend to be maybe a little more direct, firm, strong-willed, might be considered someone who is very results-oriented or forceful. Influence, more outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, high-spirited, and lively. Steadiness, the S on this model, tend to be maybe a little more even-tempered and accommodating, patient, tactful. And then with conscientiousness, more analytical, perhaps more reserved, precise, private, and systematic. Now, again, this isn't a disc workshop, so we're not going to go into detail about each of these styles. I do, however, want to point out a few things about this. You might recognize when I revealed some of the characteristics of these four styles that some of the other characteristics also resonate with you. And that's okay, because I want to point out to all of you that we all are a blend of each of these four styles. And there is no one style that is better or worse than the other. So I want to give you a quick moment now. You've already identified where you believe that you fall on the horizontal continuum and on the vertical continuum. So that should reveal to you where on this model might you fall, might be your tendency, your most accurate tendency. So go ahead and take a quick note there on page 3. Do you believe you would fall in the dominance area, influence, steadiness, or conscientiousness? And if there's any words or phrases that you see here that resonate or really stand out to you, go ahead and take note of those on page 3 as well. Right. Now, if you're willing and confident with sharing, I invite you to go ahead and share it in the chat. Where do you believe your preferred style is? I will share with you. My style, because I have completed this assessment, is a CS. So I'm actually a blend of two styles, but mostly on the C side, conscientiousness. So yes. And this isn't surprising to me because I feel like I believe there are a majority that would fall in the C area. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah. Okay, good. So we have an idea of where we might fall. So giving you this information is going to help you understand some of those tendencies and needs or motivators that might be influencing why you might be procrastinating. So let's get into that a little bit more here. Now, there are many, many reasons why you might procrastinate, including the nature of the task or the assignment you're being asked to complete. But let's start with the D style. So individuals with this style are motivated by making an impact, by being in charge. They really enjoy advancement or seeing progress being made. These styles are also enjoy competition. They like to be the best at whatever it is that is happening or the task or the project that they're working on. D styles, because of this, are demotivated when they start feeling stuck. And feeling stuck can be for many reasons. It can be due to a lack of control or freedom. It could be a lack of seeing those tangible results or seeing any progress being made, or if there's too much cautious decision making or over deliberation about any particular part or of the project or task as a whole. That can really be demotivating for a D style. So with this, we understand then that D styles might procrastinate due to low autonomy, meaning they'll procrastinate as a way to resist the lack of control over their own time. They might procrastinate because it's overly detailed work. Overly detailed work isn't going to fuel their advancement or need for progress. So instead, they're going to decide to procrastinate to find other more exciting work to do first. They might procrastinate due to a lack of immediate impact. So those D-style individuals don't like getting into the weeds or laying the groundwork because it delays progress. So the payoff, if you're getting into the weeds, that payoff for a D-style is way too far in the future. They want to see it right now. They want to experience progress right now. Also, they might decide to procrastinate because the task might be outside their wheelhouse. So again, I mentioned competition. D styles like to win. So if a task requires a skill set that they're not confident that they have, they might choose to avoid it. So let's look at another style. Individuals with I style are motivated by enthusiasm, novelty, positivity, that social recognition, and relationships. They can get a ton accomplished when the work is exciting, but When they become demotivated, they start feeling like a cog just spinning around or being another piece of the puzzle. That can be very tedious and feel like it's slow work. Maybe being isolated from others, or if the task or the assignment is very impersonal, or if there's a pessimistic environment that they are trying to work in. This all makes sense for those I style individuals. Now, they might procrastinate if the novelty fails, because individuals with the I style usually start more than they actually finish because they like the initial phase. They like that excitement of the newness of the idea. So if that novelty begins to fail, they might tend to start procrastinating on completing or continuing with that task or assignment. They might also procrastinate due to too many competing ideas. They have a lot of ideas, and they tend to say yes. So if you're an I style, you might find out that you are that yes person. You are always willing and wanting to say yes to everything. But you might tend to do that, say yes to others before really thinking through whether you have time to do that extra work. So when it becomes overwhelming and overloaded, then you start procrastinating because it just becomes too much competing ideas. Also, that dependence on social energy. So isolating work or tasks are very demotivating to the sociable I styles because they get their energy from interacting with other people. So they prefer environments and projects and assignments that allow more of that social capability. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of agreement here, so this is good so far. Keep it coming, and please do take notes in your participant guide on page 4 so that you can remember what's coming up for you. S styles now, these individuals are motivated by helping others. That collaboration, those relationships, and some stability absolutely is important for our S styles. They're demotivated by feeling unsettled. If the energy drains out of a project or when they're working with others and there's tension, when that energy level goes down, it's demotivating for our S styles. Unpredictability can also be a demotivating factor. Unclear expectations, that for me is a big one. Or when working under pressure, that can also be demotivating. So our S styles may procrastinate when they have decision anxiety. Again, I shared I'm a CS style. Making decisions is extremely hard for me. So, decision anxiety, they will procrastinate because they want and need that reassurance with decisions. Now, it doesn't mean S styles can't make a decision or that they can't make a good decision. S styles need reassurance of the decision that they're making. So, if they're not receiving that reassurance, that might be why they're procrastinating. Even decisions that seem non-consequential to other personalities can really cause stress for these individuals. Unclear expectations is another one. They'll delay starting a task if they lack clarity for the desired outcome. Fear of letting others down. They tend to underestimate what their own competencies and capabilities are. I am, for one, have a fear of failure, so that's a big one for me to have to overcome as well. Overwhelmed from supporting everyone. So again, those S styles, they're too accommodating to everyone else's needs, and they tend to volunteer and want to help everyone. So that can then become very overwhelming, which might cause them to then want to step away or procrastinate on the task or the assignment. So finally, this brings us to our C style individuals. And I saw earlier we had a lot of you that identified yourself in that C area. So our C style individuals are motivated by gaining knowledge and expertise. They're motivated by having independence, by creating order out of systems and problem solving. This means they're demotivating when they start feeling unprepared. So a big one for me is ambiguity. If I'm asked to do something, a new project or a task or an assignment, and there's not a lot of information about what the goals are, what the outcomes are, what needs to happen, that ambiguity is something that really is going to cause me to put the brakes on. So that's something to be aware of. Also, when there's inconsistent or inaccurate standards, or having to compromise on their self-imposed high standards. So we talked about those perfectionists earlier. This is really where that comes into play. So they might tend to procrastinate due to that perfectionism or the fear of errors. Their aversion to making mistakes is generally higher than other individuals and with other styles. The desire for all information and perfect conditions first. So requiring all that info before getting started rarely happens. But for C styles, it's hard to overcome that. So when they don't have all the information up front, it's hard to get started even. So that procrastination becomes a real challenge. Overanalyzing before acting. Think about analysis paralysis, and I saw that come up earlier in the chat, that analysis paralysis happening for some of you. C styles want to think through everything. They want to think through all the angles before taking the first step to do anything. So it becomes another challenge. Now, again, let me reiterate here. There are so many reasons each one of us procrastinates, and we just scratch the surface as to why we might do this. But those reasons, again, might depend on our style motivators. And several of you are already mentioning that you're gaining some new information here, which I love. I love seeing this. So this is great news. So again, the good thing now is that since you have an idea of what your style is, what your preferred tendencies are, your motivators, this gives you some insight into why you might tend to procrastinate, which means you can use this information to help you overcome that. So let's use this to now look at some of our style hacks. Overcoming procrastination is going to take a lot more than willpower. It requires you to have self-awareness and understanding what your emotions are that are driving your particular delay based on what your style is. We all do it for different reasons, and many of us have different styles. So we want to make sure that we understand ourselves first. This is also going to give you some information that might help you gain some insight into why some of your colleagues or peers or direct reports might be procrastinating. And this can maybe help give you some information that you can then use to help them. So let's look at this in a way that's going to help us understand how we can use this as our fuel to then move forward. So D style, let's start there. The D style again might procrastinate from resistance or from boredom. So in order to find the right fuel for you, maybe find your style's motivation for results and moving at a fast pace by creating challenges for yourself. Maybe locating spaces of control within the task or assignment that you're being asked to do. You might not be able to control everything, but where can you control something about the task within that process? Make it a competition for yourself. So creating those challenges can be very helpful. Let's look at the I style. I styles might procrastinate when the newness of that idea fades. Remember the novelty. If that fades, it's not new anymore, that can be an issue. Or if the task or assignment lacks that social interaction or creativity for the I style. So again, fuel the sociable, enthusiastic, idea-driven motivators by chunking time in ways that keep energy high and lively for your I style. And then try and also add some social elements to routine tasks. That could also be a great driver for the I style. S styles procrastinate because they want to make the right decision and avoid conflict. So fuel your style motivators of being supportive, steady, relationship focused, and really try to keep things moving by setting a time limit on making decisions and also setting boundaries so that you're not taking on too much. Finally, with our C style individuals, again, they may get slowed down because of their very high standards and desire for perfection, as well as that need to obtain all the information, everything, you name it. They want all the details, all the steps, all the outcomes, all the questions. They want everything before they even get started. Now you can fuel the style motivation for analysis, for accuracy focus, and those details by identifying which tasks for this project or assignment you're being asked to do, which of those areas can be good enough, and using first drafts in a way to help you gain clarity. I had to do this several times. I already admitted this, even with developing this presentation for you today. I was sharing this information with my director, with my colleagues, just trying to be like, is this enough? Can this be good? And move on. It becomes very overwhelming. Now, it sounds straightforward, but how can we ensure that we are going to take action with what we've covered today, with all the information that I've shared with you in such a short period of time? How can we be sure that we are able to apply it and take action? Well, I've come up with an acronym, and I think we here all at UC, we know that UC loves acronyms, so I'm adding another one to your list. So this is called TIA, and I want you to use TIA as a way to help you get started with applying some of these style hacks for your particular style. So step one, think. Think about why. Why are you procrastinating? Is it because the task is boring or too small for you? Is it lonely or too quiet? Is it overwhelming or too new? Is it intimidating? Maybe there's not enough data. Understand, think about why are you procrastinating with this particular assignment or project? And it might look different for every task or assignment that you're working with. So think about it first. Step two, identify. Identify your style motivators. And we shared some of those earlier, and you have reference to that now in your guide. So identify what motivators do you need in order to help you move forward? What fuels you? Step three then is apply. I want you to apply a style hack or commit to a chosen strategy, whatever works for you. If you've been able to identify a strategy in the past that you know works for you, commit to it and apply to it. So I want to share with you an example of a strategy that I think we all could benefit from or apply. This is an if-then strategy. Again, I've mentioned I am a CS style, so this might be a strategy you come up with if you are a C style. If I feel the urge to procrastinate on creating this presentation, I've already admitted that, because it feels imperfect and rushed, that was the reason I identified as why I was struggling with this. Then I will identify good enough spaces for at least 5 minutes. So this really helps give you an area that you can completely focus on based on your particular style, the reason why you are procrastinating to help you get moving forward. So you have this example in your participant guide on page 7. So I want to give you just a quick minute. Go ahead. Think about something you might be delaying right now. What are you procrastinating on? Do you have something that's due coming up soon and you're like, you know what? I just don't even want to attempt it. I haven't even started, or maybe you've started and you just haven't, I don't know. You can't do it, whatever it is. Go ahead and complete an if-then example in your participant guide there on page 7. Thank you, Erica, for adding the guide on the chat again. So if you joined us a little later, this is your guide. Go ahead, scroll to page 7, write out an if-then example. And if anyone has something that they would be willing to share, I would love for you to enter that in the chat. We have just a couple of minutes remaining here. So go ahead and do that. I'm going to wrap us up here, and then I want to get to some questions. But yes, go ahead and try to write your if-then example. So I hope this is a helpful start for how you can address your procrastination tendencies or reasons. Remember, your style isn't a hurdle, it's your engine. So use the right fuel to stop stalling and start doing. So with that, I want to say thank you everyone for joining, for choosing to spend some of your time with us today. This has been a lot of fun, even though I struggled pulling this presentation together. I'm admitting that to everyone here today. I am so very thankful, and I'll tell you, those strategies helped me get through. So thank you again so much. I know we have some questions in the chat. I'm going to look at those, but I also know we have some closing remarks. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Erica for those closing remarks.
All right. Thank you so much, Joanna. That was so great. And already we have a few questions that came in, so we can hit those first. One question that popped in was people are very interested in the DISC assessment. And is it something that UCR currently offers, or can it be requested? Just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yes, we do currently offer it. We have a process where you can submit a request or you can email our team. I will type our email, our shared email in the chat here. And as I'm typing here, HR training contacts. Um, you can send us an email. Let us know what your interest is. We do team presentations. We don't have DISC as an open enrollment, but you can certainly ask us whatever your interest or question is about DISC or any of our other assessments that we offer. Just send us an email, reach out, and we are more than happy to work with you as an individual or even as a team to share these assessments. So yes, we do have it available here at UC Riverside.
Perfect. And there's another question here. I don't know if it was a question or a comment, but I'm just going to ask it because I thought it was a good one. Is procrastinating ever beneficial for someone who chronically overthinks or overanalyzes the task to be done?
I love that question because I feel like it's talking to my heart because that's what I do. I overanalyze, I question everything. I have a huge, immense fear of failure. And I tend to procrastinate because of those reasons. I don't want to fail. I don't have all the information. But the thing about procrastination, again, is it's not a personal failure. It's really in being aware and finding that understanding of why it is, what is driving that procrastination for you. At the end of the day, we're all here to get a job done. We need to make progress. We need to be able to hit those milestones or those deadlines. And so what I have found that has helped me is I lean on my colleagues. I lean on my director and I seek feedback as much as I can, because if I can't get out of that cycle of that analysis paralysis or overthinking or not having that enough information, it can really be detrimental. And I don't want to let anybody down at the same time. I want to be able to provide that work and that completion. So it's really helpful if you can find the vice that's going to help you move forward. For me, it's working with colleagues. It's seeking that feedback. It's getting that reassurance that, yes, this looks great. Go ahead and continue moving forward. That has been really helpful for me. So my advice would be find your thing that's going to help you move forward based on your style and your needs.
All right, we'll try to get a couple more in here. There was a question earlier in the presentation, if you can elaborate on what is a good enough space?
Yeah, yeah, good enough spaces. Again, I use this as an area for this presentation. I can't tell you how many iterations I had for this because it just wasn't good enough. That perfectionism mentality that I have being a C style or CS style. So identifying areas that are good enough. So not everything needs to be perfect. Sometimes we just need to include A, B, and C, and it doesn't need to look fancy or pretty or whatever it is. Sometimes we just overthink what the ask is. So identify, maybe say, have that conversation with your director or whoever it is that's giving you this assignment and let them know, hey, I'm thinking, can I use this and just do X, Y, and Z? Is that going to be good? And get that confirmation. Try to find those areas where good enough is not underperforming, but it's not giving you the spin in your mind that you have to do more and more and more. So I hope that helps clarify.
I think it did, Joanna. And there's a great comment in here from Susan. Email can be a huge proponent to procrastinating other tasks or projects by diverting your attention from what needs to be done and what is new and competing with that project. So
Yeah,
totally
so
agree.
true. Yeah, I agree too.
All right. Well, I think that's it for questions. I think this was an amazing session. I'll start with our closing comments, but Joanna, thank you. I mean, this resonated with, I think, every single one of us, so that was great. So in closing, we hope you've enjoyed your time with us today. As you know, our goal is to keep the UCR Staff Conference 100% free to attend. We couldn't do that without the generous support of our sponsors, UC Riverside Staff Assembly, LEAD, UCR's Human Resources and Employee and Organizational Development, and Schools First Credit Union. As a reminder, the session recording will be viewable through the Zoom event website for 90 days. And there's a few reminders that our awesome co-host Dominica already put in the chat. Just a reminder, our in-person closing session takes place tomorrow, March 25th at 2 p.m. Please RSVP on the conference website if you haven't already to reserve a spot. Nominations for next year's lead board would be opening very, very soon. So the link is here in the chat as well. Staff Assembly Board nominations are currently open. Elections will open April 20th through 24th. For more information, you can visit the Staff Assembly UCR.edu elections webpage or sign up for the UCR EOD listserv so you can get lots of information on our upcoming courses. So with that, you guys, this was so fun. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, Joanna. We hope to see you in many more sessions, you guys, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Enjoy.